His face streaked with tears, he writhed in his seat. His legs stretched. Bare ankle appeared below his jeans. His shirt pulled loose, his back hunching, his head pressed to my car's roof. I saw claws, sharp and heavy, slide from beneath his fingernails. Underneath his face, the bones shifted shape. The brow rose and sloped, the lower jaw lengthened front and rear. Muscles bulged in his face, telling of terrible power in his bite. I'd been hunting for the so-called werewolf, who killed my sister. Now he was in my passenger seat, and I had only seconds to decide what to do. One August evening 4 years ago, my sister, Ginger Ames, died at the Square Diner in Drunken Tree. The coroner ruled her death accidental. She fell on broken glass when people were running away in panic. Even if that was true, I still blamed the bastard who started the panic. The man who killed Ginger was described as about 5'10" to 6 foot, wavy dark blonde hair loose to his shoulders, clean-shaven, brown eyes, no scars. 20 people there, but no photos. That's panic for you. Ordinary looking, except when he was 7 feet tall and had claws he could sheathe like a cat's. That description's from the man who served his burger and fries, just before he started crying, grew a foot taller, and started killing people. This fall, a man named Robert Suter was torn open in the parking lot of the same diner. His friend Carrie White said they'd been discussing Ginger's death. Suter had been a witness that night. Another man, Jacob Evers, had been with Carrie and Suter. She'd dated Evers several times. She introduced Evers to Suter. They all had dinner together, but she left before they did. Suter was found dead in the parking lot. Evers hasn't been seen since. Jacob Evers was described as 5'9" to 6 foot, hazel eyes, bald, full blonde beard. Ordinary looking, aside from the whiskers. Carrie White said he had no scars or tattoos, anywhere she'd had opportunity to see. Police said the name is probably false. 4 years ago, right after Ginger's funeral, I met with Leanne Gross. Leanne had been Ginger's lover for about a year. A few months before Ginger was killed, they'd quietly split up, but they'd remained close friends and talked frequently. Now I learned that Leanne spoke to Ginger the night she was killed. She called me, asked if Travis had come by. They talked all the time, you know. I knew. Travis Mosley and Ginger had been best friends since Argenta Junior High, closer than siblings. Though I was a couple of years younger, he'd been my friend, too, as much as anybody so bottled up could be. Travis was a stoic, never betraying hurt or anger. Though he had a warm grin, he only rarely showed excitement or affection. Only Ginger could open him up. All our parents expected them to get married, then they both announced they were gay, the same week. That had rattled me. I'd never had a gay friend before, didn't know how to take it. But when I saw how he stuck by Ginger during our parents' first angry, frightened reactions, I realized I owed him the same loyalty. He'd disappeared for a while. Earlier that summer, when he reappeared, he claimed not to know where he'd been. Ginger was the only one who really believed him. Even his parents thought he was hiding something. I didn't know what to believe. I backed him because Ginger did. Now Leanne told me that Ginger and Travis had planned to meet at the Square Diner. Ginger had called Leanne because Travis was late and hadn't called her. Leanne said, Ginger thought maybe he'd come by here to get her, not remembering we split up. I toyed with the idea that Travis was the werewolf. Travis was the right size and build, a bit under 6 feet and blonde. All the descriptions called the guy ordinary looking until he changed. And Travis was the complete guy next door, ordinary as oatmeal, except for 2 stark scars on his chin and cheek from a bicycle wreck. I was ashamed for even considering him. Travis, crying in public? Laughable. And I absolutely couldn't believe he'd hurt Ginger. He'd have died first. Travis hadn't come to Ginger's funeral, though, a real shock. He'd holed up in his parents' house in Argenta, absolutely crushed by her death. I'd gone by to visit, and found him sitting in a darkened bedroom. Though glad to see me, at first he'd hardly talk. When he did, his voice was flat. It's like a curse. First I lose a month, then I lose Ginger. Something happens to Mom and Dad, no way I could stand that. I'd just die. I'd never heard that much emotion from him. A week or 2 later, he took off. Closed his apartment, stored his stuff, and left town. He called his parents every week or 2, but never told them where he was. He turned off friend tracking on his phone. I didn't see him for 4 years. About the time Travis left, I talked to the server in the diner. Only a few weeks after Ginger's funeral, Marcus Alderizio's story was already well rehearsed. Aldo said Ginger and this blonde-haired fellow came in together. The man started crying. I thought she was giving him the Dear John, said Aldo. He started crying, then he changed. I was closer than anybody else, Aldo said, right across the counter. I could see tears dripping off his chin. I can tell you, he didn't sprout hair or big fangs, none of that. But his bones changed. When he stood up he was over 7 foot. And he had claws like a cat, that he could sheathe or pop out. A lady screamed, but the real panic didn't start until some working-class hero type tried to wrestle the Catman to the ground. He eviscerated the idiot. When guts hit the floor, the diner went crazy. Less than a minute later, Ginger was dying, her belly ripped by glass. She bled to death before paramedics arrived. The coroner found bruises on her back, from feet. Hating myself, I showed Aldo a photo of Travis on my phone. Small as the image was, he immediately picked out the facial scars. Same kind of face, real John Doe type, but this guy didn't have so much as an acne scar. Perfect skin. 2 days after Suter's murder, I talked again to Aldo. Before he'd say a word, I had to remind him I was Ginger's brother, and that we'd talked 4 years earlier. But he wasn't much help regarding Jacob Evers. I told the cops, I don't know if it's the same guy. I couldn't pick either one of them out of a decent lineup, they got that kind of face. Joe average face, no scars, no tattoos, just that beard. I'd recognize this guy's voice again, maybe, we talked that much, but his face? Could be anybody. At least this time I could be sure it wasn't Travis, since Jacob had slept with Carrie White. Some small comfort. How do you find a werewolf? Or were cat? The cops thought it was some sort of stunt, and were checking all of Ginger's acquaintances. They'd investigated Travis, too, but I still felt guilty. In 4 years, while I was in college, they found no leads on the diner killer. Now, with Robert Suter, there'd been another killing. They wouldn't say whether they thought it was the same killer. But either way, they weren't looking for a shapeshifter with cat claws. I was. A shapeshifter who cried. My granddad used to say of someone, he was raised breathing Drunken Tree Lake. He meant that people who move to the area don't have the same attitudes as people who grew up here. And people who grew up in town don't have the same attitudes as those who lived along the shore or in the hills. Things happen around here. Sometimes people make things happen. This fall, after wondering for 4 years about Ginger's death, I wanted to make something happen. I looked up a lady who'd been my grandmother's friend when I was little, and asked her what she remembered about Ginger's death. If she'd blamed it on drugs, like the newspapers, I'd have visited a while and gone home. But she said, that was a terrible thing. And that creature's still around, somewhere. You heard he killed another man last week? When I told her what I wanted, she warned, some of those folks can be as dangerous as the thing that killed Ginger. You should keep your distance from them. I told her I had to find the Catman, whatever it took. You're fixing to do it anyway, she said finally, so I suppose I ought to steer you to the right people. Let me ask about, see who's still walking this earth. I left my number. A week later she called me. There's a man named Yuri White, lives on Grace Mountain, Jackson Road. He won't do anything, but he'll put you in touch. She read me a number. Yuri White, Jackson Road. Mr. White, to you. He's uppish that way. Mr. White refused to talk on the phone or invite me to his home. I'll meet you at the old Second Baptist, downtown Argenta. You know it? Across from Guthrie Park? That's it. I'll be there at 3 to meet someone else. If you come, we'll talk. I'll have a black necktie. Guthrie Park is a square block on JFK. Crossing the park to Second Baptist Church, I spotted a broad-shouldered bald guy with a blonde beard, maybe 40, leaning against a historic marker, gazing up at the church. I tensed, then relaxed. Since Suter was killed, I'd been clenching up at every bald, bearded blonde I saw. The little church had closed down, I discovered. A sign said it would soon be a neighborhood resource center. Inside, several young people in jeans and t-shirts worked at scrubbing and painting concrete block walls. The color of Mr. White's tie was irrelevant, nobody else even had a collar. He was a tall, thin man, perhaps in his late 60s, with thick snow-white hair and a narrow mustache. I briefly told Ginger's story. "I want to find him," I said. "Landy said you knew people." "Perhaps. Have you heard of the coterie?" "The what?" "No, sir." "Good, you shouldn't have. And it would be good if no one heard of them from you." He smiled thinly. "One of them is likely to have the required skill. And this sort of case often interests them." He stooped toward me. "They will expect a substantial payment. Are you prepared to pay?" I remembered standing by Ginger's grave, sweating in my best suit. "If I can afford it, sir, I'll pay whatever it takes." The bearded guy still stood looking at the church. His eyes flicked to me as I came out, looked away, then came back more sharply. "Rick?" he said. The voice rang bells but the face didn't. "Sorry?" He grinned, obviously unsurprised at my lack of recognition. Even with a beard, that grin was familiar, and took 15 years off him. I looked at the tanned scalp, the whiskered jaw. "Travis? Hey, man, how you been?" He'd grown thin since I'd last seen him. The broad shoulders only emphasized that. And that bare scalp, cancer? But there was a robustness to him that belied that thought. "Clean," I thought, then couldn't think why. "Where the hell have you been?" It just burst out. He'd been such a part of Ginger's life, then he'd fallen off the earth. Before he answered, he walked right up and put his arms around me. I returned his embrace somewhat hesitantly, unused to such display from him. He stepped back and looked me over. "I've been kinda messed up," he said. "I lost more in a month of my life, and I'm still hunting for it." "You still don't know how?" "Jesus, your mom must have called Ginger 200 times while you were missing, asking had she heard from you." "Where have you been since?" "Around. You'd have seen me, but I hear you went to Texas A&M. He punched me on the shoulder. "Traitor. I had to get away. After Ginger, I couldn't stay home. Compared to Arkansas, Texas is like a foreign goddamn country. Yeah, Ginger messed me up, too. I spent so much time trying to find out what happened to her. Me, too, whenever I came home." "You believe in this werewolf shit?" "Not one goddamn bit." His jaw clenched. "I believe in plain old human fuckery, that's more than enough. Listen, I've got to get to the bank." "Are you at your mom's house?" "We should talk, compare notes. Maybe between us we've got all the pieces." He cocked his head. "You mean you've actually found out something?" "I must have talked to 100 people who said they were there that night, and not more than 10 of them were for real. I think I've got a lead, at least. But I really have to get across town. You carry a phone, right?" I sent him a text, so we had each other's numbers. I was in line at the bank when my phone rang. $2,000, mister. White told me, $500 in advance, for our expenses. $1,500 if and when we find him. If we can't, we don't bill you. I whistled softly. "That's a lot. This requires more than a Craigslist ad, Mr. Ames. Our techniques can be dangerous, even when we aren't seeking a known killer." Earlier he'd said they, not we. "How fast do you need the 5? Please have it by this evening. Somebody will come for it. She'll call herself Kite. Free spirit, huh?" "No, Mr. Ames. A very efficient hunter. She couldn't have been 16 yet, skinny and coltish, but she scared me. When I opened my door, she stood on my porch, twitching like an open switchblade. The sunset flamed against her strawberry blonde hair. I'm Kite. I'd have sooner invited a hooded cobra into my apartment, but she slipped in before I could protest. I had the urge to check my ribs for slashes. I gave her a $500 cashier's check, and she gave me a receipt. "We'll keep Mr. White informed." When she was gone, I drew a deep breath, and felt myself shuddering. "Our techniques can be dangerous, Mr. White had said. She was scary as hell, but seemed like she'd be fast and efficient. I had no idea how fast things were about to move. In 2 hours, I'd know nearly everything. 15 minutes after Kite left, someone knocked. My heart pounding, fearful she'd returned, I opened the door. Travis stood there. The sunset had already faded. Thin, hairless, his beard grayed in the twilight, he looked like the ghost of Travis yet to come. "Hey, man," he said softly. "Your mom told me where you live. This a good time to talk?" "Yeah, sure, come on in." Don't like talking inside. How about we go for a drive around the lake? I started to protest, but something in his face stopped me. There was a look of tremendous calm, even peace, about him, but it was the peace of someone who has swallowed an enormous pain, certain of his capacity to absorb it. Yeah, sure, I said again. Let me go pee and grab a drink. Driving north through the Marina District, we exchanged news about our families, our parents, his grandfather, my older brother Gary in Atlanta. Not until we hit the quiet, dark, tree-flanked roads of Grace Mountain did our talk turn to Ginger. I summarized what I'd learned over the years, though I didn't admit showing his photo to Aldo. He listened intently, without commenting. At the end he said, "Well, it's too bad, but you ain't got anything I didn't already have." But he didn't seem disappointed. In fact, he seemed almost relieved. I asked him what he knew that I didn't. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know if you're ready to hear some of it." "What, Travis, that's not fair. She's my sister." But I watched his face close, growing distant. I realized something. Travis had been trying to open up with me as he had with Ginger. But I wasn't Ginger, and in the end he couldn't trust me that far. It hurt, but I resolved not to show it. So I realized something about myself. I was trying to be like Travis, stoic and strong. Before he came out, I'd have never guessed that a gay man would one day be my role model for tough. And a final revelation. 4 years at A&M hadn't taught me anything about dealing with death. Though older than Ginger had been when she died, I was still a kid, asking the grown-ups for help. We were winding down Grace Mountain Road, less than a minute from the center of Drunken Tree. To circle the lake, we'd turn east toward Shore Road, right past the Square Diner. I'd been by it often, small as Drunken Tree is. To avoid the diner you'd have to avoid the whole town. But tonight Ginger's memories were strong. I signaled a right turn, my grip painfully tight on the wheel. There in the bright lights, people sat eating supper. "Well, if you won't help me," I said, "somebody else will. I've been talking to people. They think they can find the guy with the claws." I stopped, embarrassed to say more. "Who the hell told you that?" "Don't snap it, sorry, I just feel so damn silly saying it. They're witches. You know the stories around here, witchcraft, covens up in the hills. They can find things cops can't." He sucked in sharply. "You were at the church. Who was it?" "People called the coterie. They say they can help." "Oh, Christ, Rick, are you crazy? They're dangerous. How the hell did you even hear of the coterie?" I asked around. "Old folks. You know the people I could ask." The village fell behind us. From here to the dam, Shore Road was woodland and houses on large private tracts, with a few shoreside developments. I tried to twitch the wheel toward it but my arms wouldn't obey, or obeyed a deeper command. "I didn't hurt her," he growled, a voice from the pit. "Another man killed her, on purpose. You gotta believe me." Now a ditch ran along the road's right side. I'd missed my chance with trees over there. Tall poles for high-tension lines were flashing by on the left, shining in moonlight, too far from the road. Then I remembered the bridge over Possum Walk Creek. A short stretch to accelerate, a quick twitch to the right, and a concrete post would tear off everything behind my right headlight. He must have seen my eyes change as the bridge came into sight. As I floored the gas, he leapt at me, roaring. My last hesitation overcome, I turned squarely toward the bridge pillar. One clawed hand snatched at the wheel, tearing a gash across my raised arm. The other grabbed the transmission lever and chunked it into neutral. The engine screamed, racing. For a frantic half-second we fought the wheel. I heard a hard bam and tearing sounds. Then we shot off the far end of the bridge and slid sideways into a chain-link fence. The car reared onto its side, and Travis fell on me. I couldn't move, pinned by his arms. I waited for the claws to rip into me. And waited. "Are you done?" Travis rumbled. "If you are, we need to get out of here. Somebody'll call the cops." He pulled himself off of me, up into the passenger seat. Wedging himself there, he shoved his weight back and forth, rocking the car against the fence. After 3 or 4 well-timed shoves, the car toppled, whamming down onto 4 wheels. Amazingly, the engine was still running. By feel, not taking my eyes off him, I shifted into reverse, pulled away from the fence, then pulled forward to swing onto the pavement. He opened his door and stepped out. "I'll find you," I said. "You can't get Don't be a dweeb, he said, startling me into silence. I'm just gonna check the car. He walked around. I heard, holy crap, followed by the creak of metal and crackle of plastic. Turn around, go back to the bridge. We gotta pick up your bumper before some poor dumbass runs over it. Hardly believing myself, I did as he said. My rear bumper lay half across the road. With arms unnaturally long, he picked it up, opened my rear door, and wedged it into my back seat. That's gonna cost you some. He climbed into the front, bending almost double to fit. Not a mark on the right side, until just behind the rear wheel. A foot further back, you'd've missed the post completely. 6 inches forward, you'd've lost the wheel. He pointed east. Turn around. Drive. I drove. I could never hurt you, Rick, he said. He shook his head. I didn't hurt Ginger, either. She was safe, or should have been. Fresh tears in his eyes, he told me the true story of how Ginger died. I only interrupted once, to exclaim, you slept with Carrie White, just to find someone she knew. Yeah, I'm not proud of that. But I would have done worse, to find that guy. When it was over, I should have had 1,000 questions, but I only had 3. When I saw you tonight, I thought you looked, well, peaceful. Is that why? Because you got the truth about Ginger? Peaceful? Oh, man, I wish. But yeah, I feel better than I have for a long time. You haven't said, how do you change back? Start laughing? I guessed to him it was a chuckle. It sounded like a bulldozer breaking up pavement. I wish. No, it's what you said first. I gotta get peaceful. I have to let go of myself. That bulldozer sound again. It's as hard as letting myself cry. I'm too uptight, even when I ought to relax. I couldn't think of but one answer for that. I pulled into the Folk Dam parking lot, put the car in park, and walked around to his door. Get out, I said. He frowned up at me, but then clambered out, standing up, and up and up. I hugged him, something I hadn't done since we were kids. It was weirdly like being 10 years old again, when he was 12 and sprouting like a chinaberry tree. My head rested on his chest. I've got you, I told him now. Just for a little while. Let me hold on to everything for you. First, he cried. Then a car passed, and he gave a soundless laugh. We look like a fine couple, I bet. And finally, I felt the tension go out of his back, out of his chest. Stand back, he hissed. From a pace away, I watched him shrink to the Travis Mosley I knew. He drew a deep breath of the cold night air, and grinned a familiar grin. Warm but shallow. He was already rebuilding his walls. I knew now they held a door for me, as they had for Ginger. I asked my last question. Why were you at Second Baptist? I already suspected the answer. I was following a woman. I think she's codery, but I don't think she knows about me. She's a witch, I'm pretty sure, but not all the codery are bad. I want information, and I think she'll talk to me. That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.